If you watch enough YouTube, you've probably seen ads for.
Once again, we're seeing big tech blur the lines.
It's no wonder that there's chaos.
We are bombarded by news. It's really hard to figure out who to trust these days.
It's often hard to find the truth of the story.
Outlets can change how you interpret the facts.
Which is why I've trusted Ground News.
Luckily, there's Ground News.
Let me tell you about Ground News.
All of the world's media in one place.
Just the facts.
And I can actually see which articles come from reputable news sources.
This way you can see through bias straight away.
And it helps us to get out of our echo chamber.
You've got to get out of your echo chamber.
Be a more informed critical thinker.
It really is fascinating to see how different biases and different lenses impact the news.
More transparent media landscape.
And that's why we love Ground News.
And that's why I love Ground News so much.
Stay engaged with Ground News.
Check out Ground News.
Ground News.
Ground News.
Ground News.
Ground News.
Quite unlike any other news app out there.
If you want the full range of well-rounded views, please check out our sponsor, Ground News.
Yes! I love epic rap battles of history. Please do Joker vs. Dr. Fauci next. It'd be so epic if he said, "You wanna know how I got myocarditis?" But as well as Ground News ads, you've probably seen videos by controversial YouTuber Annoying Orange. Look, unfortunately today I won't be cancelling Annoying Orange once and for all. The airing of #MeToo allegations against Orange will have to wait for another video, and trust me, they're not pretty. But today, I want to talk about Ground News, the news aggregator app that creates a personalised feed for users claiming to inform them of their own blind spots and of a news outlet's particular bias. More specifically, who's the demographic for that app? People who are engaged enough to read the daily news but are too lazy to come up with their own judgments on it, so they're happy paying to outsource their own thinking to a robot that says, "This outlet is left-wing. This outlet is right-wing. 1 or 0. 1 or 0. Wow, what a cutting-edge app. 60s technology. I suppose the answer to this question shouldn't surprise me. It's the same answer to all my questions that begin with, who the fuck gets off on paying for insert awful thing? The answer invariably is Redditors. Hey Adelaide, guess what? As usual, you have the privilege of being the first hound to see my brand new show, which is Friendlyjordies Alien Hunter. Yes, it's seriously about UFOs. You don't want to miss this one. Easily the best show I've ever done. Easily the best show I will ever do. How can it get any better than Are We Alone? That's it. I have to retire after this. I can't up it. Now, I'm not in the business of shaming YouTubers for taking sponsors. Unless I feel like it. Or it's trendy to do so at that particular time. So just the general YouTuber rule, frankly. Fuck anyone that takes money from Clash of Clans. Raid Shadow Legends crew for life. I want to put in a disclaimer, even though this video will be critical of Ground News, this is not a call for YouTubers to stop accepting their money. Keep taking it. It's completely fine. It's difficult enough to make a living as a YouTuber. You take away sponsorships from scam products like Honey, BetterHelp, established titles. How's Mr. Beast gonna make a buck?
Install Honey.
In fact, I'm personally very down to do shitty sponsorships. My biggest regret in my entire career was that there was this hentai site that wanted to do a sponsorship with us and then reneged because we were, quote, too controversial. Do you have any idea how demeaning it is to have a hentai site say we're ashamed of you? What this is, though, is an appeal to you, the viewer. Don't subscribe to Ground News. Even if you see me do an ad for them, just mute the video for 30 seconds because Ground News is like reading a book by Mark Manson. Yeah, I've learned a lot, hi. Have you actually learned a lot? No. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Ground News. Nah, just joking. For some reason, that deal never came through. Here's why Ground News sets me off. I can't tell you how many times I've said this. At least 6. But you've got to stop viewing the world through this left-right paradigm to begin with. Pigeonholing things as left and right is to politics what the subtle art of not giving a fuck is to Buddhism. Fuck, I've got to stop laying into Mark Manson. He really doesn't deserve it. I think it all just stems from me being in airports and looking at the books. Why are you still on the bestsellers shelf? I could go into why labeling things left and right is my biggest pet peeve for an hour, so we'll fast forward most of that to point out that even on the tin, you know how people generally use these vague, foggy concepts of left and right? How dumb would you have to be to subscribe to the idea that gigantic multinational media corporations, some of which are entirely owned by billionaires, are leaning left? Because now there's an app for that. People pay for that service. That's just financial domination. I mean, to call CNN left-wing, to say that, you would have to believe left-wing and right-wing are defined entirely by the way people speak about transgenders and immigrants. But even then it gets a little blurry with the right immigrants and the right transgenders. You see how these labels immediately cave in on themselves? That's because ideology, let alone ideological labels defined by a 1 or a 0, are an inefficient and stupid framework to understand anything. I much prefer a political compass to understand the nuances of the world, because we all know that there are definitely more than 2 things, but 5 things, that seems to be pushing it. Let's settle for 4. Psst, down here. The truth will set you free. I'm not even being facetious when I say astrology would be a far more complex and multifaceted way of analysing articles, whether you believe it or not. I mean, I personally do, but even if you don't, at least astrology has you thinking about 12 possibilities? Way more if we're including birth charts. MSNBC was created in July. A bookish Cancer. No wonder Trump's erratic Gemini energy rubs them the wrong way. Like, come on, that is way more complicated than left-wing versus right-wing. They're completely subjective terms. You can tell because whenever their target audience, Redditors, start labeling something as left or right, inevitably and immediately the thread will devolve into a smug off of, bro thinks that's left wing. These words are deliberately nebulous, perpetuated by the propaganda model to give off the illusion that there is this grand ideological battle taking place between the major media outlets. In reality, all that's happening is a grand battle between slightly different business interests. That's the true grand culture war taking place. Whose stock prices are going to be pumped, Disney or Tesla's? They mask that fight with these ever-shifting buzzwords that are essentially just a reflection of what's culturally currently fashionable. It's the exact design of how propaganda in the West works. So really, ground news should be advertising that can't be bothered to even put in the lazy, dismissive terms you've been socially conditioned to automatically fire off. We'll do it for you. And I'm not even being derisive in labeling media as propaganda. This is just another part of the propaganda model. They changed the term propaganda from a neutral to negative one so that only certain outlets are given this self-anointed prestige of being objective. Nothing's fucking objective. Nothing. It's very important to remember that. Propaganda comes from the Latin word propagare, to spread, to disseminate. It means spreading an idea. This is why when people pretend like it's some mad expose to say, Friendlyjordies is propaganda. No shit. Everything that anyone says ever is propaganda. When you talk, that's propaganda. I make propaganda. This whole channel's propaganda. Every piece of media that you will ever consume in your life, including your mum's Facebook post about how proud she is of you on your birthday, is propaganda. The only propaganda you should be concerned by is that which is either too stupid to recognize that it is propaganda or too sinister to reveal that it is propaganda. Or, worst of both worlds, like the traditional press, genuinely thinks that it's impartial, objective, unbiased truth, standing as a railguard against propaganda. Really, the actual difference between me and most other people in both the mainstream and new media spheres is, I don't pretend to be a robot. I'm not trying to con you into this idea that I'm this neutral arbiter of truth. Plus, I try not to lie, which is more than you can say about many of these other outlets. But I'm certainly not neutral. Saying that, however, is very different to how the public has been trained to interpret that, which is, oh, he's not neutral, therefore he is, insert meaningless phrase masquerading as a consistent ideology. I will never claim to be a conservative, progressive, anarchist, fascist, communist. Well, maybe I'm a MAGA communist, because guess what? All those labels define nothing without a ton of qualifying sentences that usually collapse in on themselves, and even when they are, they're usually weaponized to pull political discussion out of reality and into the magic world where ideologies are Yu-Gi-Oh cards for adults. All that being said, I am completely and utterly biased. Because everyone is. But thanks to the work of some clever thinkers from the 20th century, namely reporter Walter Lippmann, the key figure in propagating the bullshit concept of journalistic objectivity, everyone has been conditioned to think that someone being honest about the fact that they're biased is somehow dishonest. We'll go into Lippmann soon, but first, let me fess up and give you my bias. Ooh, selfish and I love it! In the simplest terms, I guess my bias is that I generally support workers' parties over their corporate-backed opposition. And I'm pragmatic. Unfortunately, I don't think a vanguard of 300 neurodivergent stoners is going to have what it takes to undermine Australia's oligarchs. I also don't think that a few independents backed by a different faction of oligarchs are our shining saviours. And frankly, my bias can't fit into this meaningless ideological vent because I don't care about ideology. I care about outcomes. I care about what is materially delivered to the public, not what someone labels themselves. See, look at that. I did what Ground News does for free. But because I have the decency to tell my audience where I'm coming from, I'm not a good source, but a complete liar talking monotonously, claiming to be neutral. That's a good source. Bias is purely aesthetic, a weapon to legitimize and delegitimize people based not on reality, but a feeling. Don't trust people who tell you not to consume a type of media because it's biased. Everything is. Almost all information is disseminated for a reason, with a multitude of motivations and interests behind that dissemination. And if you want to understand the world, it helps by getting somewhat decent at identifying some of those reasons. But if you're still only capable of operating on buzzwords that are currently in vogue on Twitter, my dude, you need some media literacy. Anyone that unironically uses the phrase media literacy is definitely media literate. No one's immune to propaganda, apart from Joe Rogan. Maybe Lex Friedman. And you won't ever be 100% accurate, but trust me, you can do better yourself without the aid of a scam YouTube sponsor. You know how? By an old-fashioned technique known as reading and thinking about it a little bit. I hate to go all undergrad classic Geordie circa 2015 and recommend Chomsky's propaganda model, especially now as I'm much more into the synthesis of Michael Parenti and Donald Trump's media criticisms. Yep, as I said earlier, I'm MAGA communist. The only person the fake news media has been more unfair to than Trump is Slobodan Milosevic. Make Yugoslavia great again. Still, Noam Chomsky's propaganda model is a pretty simple and far better way to understand what you're reading than Ground News, and best of all, it doesn't require a monthly subscription. Unless that's what you suckers want. Subscribe to my Patreon, where I'll be uploading the same picture of Chomsky's propaganda model every month. I'm telling you, you can get a far more sophisticated understanding of the interest behind news from one fucking infographic. With this model, to get a broad understanding of the motivations behind media, you look at 5 filters information goes through before it gets to you. You look at who owns the outlet, which, to be fair and balanced, Ground News does, and I do like that feature. I also like how it shows you your media consumption habits that, alright, I'll stop angling for a sponsorship. But then you look at the outlet's advertising incentives. The sources the outlet relies upon. Are they relying on elite sources, e.g. PR firms and think tanks, etc.? The next filter is flack, which is basically fear of getting sued, losing sources, being prosecuted for publishing leaked documents, and just straight up cowardice to do what is needed to get stories. Then finally, right at the end, the final filter, the only other filter which Ground News kind of accounts for, Chomsky originally labelled anti-communism, which is basically the tendency to put up sensationalist fear-mongering spin on any story relating to the US's Cold War enemies. That shifted to anti-terrorism in the 2000s, but now this filter can be more broadly described as ideology, which is really just code for the press's boogeyman shifting from an external enemy to groups within your own society that you personally find annoying. This is basically why Ground News has been able to eke out a business model, because no longer are the press on an anti-communism unity ticket. The broadly superficial distinctions between mainstream media outlets became comically stratified pretty much due to Trump derangement syndrome, a phenomenon which has many explanations in and of itself, but I'd say is mainly to do with class dynamics and social views realigning. To put simply, the rich becoming libtards. Christopher Lash's Revolt of the Elites offers a decent explanation, but I won't go into that today. For more on that, you'll need to subscribe to my libtard aggregator that puts a little bar on everything online, ranking everything from cringe to based. Elon Musk changing his name on Twitter to Kekius Maximus? Ooh, off the scales based. So fucking cool that I think we need a new label, guys. Dark Gothic based.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark Gothic MAGA.
That man should never be allowed near a microphone. But returning to my original point, basically, beginning in the mid-2010s, they started replacing the unifying enemies of terrorism and communism with liberal outlets decreeing that the enemy is Trump, white men, Jan 6s, and Russia, and the conservative outlets decreeing that the enemy is unsexy M&Ms.
Characters are wearing like sexy boots, and now because women matter and women in leadership are so important, we're going to put them in frumpy, flat-soled shoes.
And we all know who's more right. I mean, they're called right for a reason. I also think this is kind of why this really pernicious myth that the news and journalism developed as this sort of altruistic venture and only recently devolved into its current state due to the public's waning attention spans and desire for sensationalist partisanship. Like, come on, how often have you heard some variation of, you see, the news used to just be about giving people the facts? No, it didn't. It never fucking was. Ever. It was always the same, just with more pictures of the Irish being depicted as apes. Donkey Kong. The news and media have always been tools of competing domestic political interests. The first newspapers ever in the United States were completely partisan and arose to support the two political parties, and good. That is way better. They were honest about it. There was the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Maybe ground news would have been useful back then. Leans, Yankee Doodle. Leans, Yellow Belly. It was the same in Australia when newspapers overtly supported and campaigned for pro-business parties. I mean, they still do, but for some reason we're now being told that we need an app to see that. In addition to standard corporate papers though, and this is the only reason that the news was better back then, is you had union-backed papers to balance the endless corporate propaganda out. Like the Labour Daily. Fortunately now, unions only have YouTubers. The reason people think that the media used to be unbiased was, again, look at the propaganda model. In the latter half of the 20th century, the tone of the US press was uncharacteristically restrained and unified against the commies. This was in large part due to the work of Walter Lippmann. Lippmann was a reporter who really paved the way for how Western media began to function in the 20th century. In fact, he is known as the father of modern journalism. This is the mastermind of it all. His 1922 book, Public Opinion, basically set out some fundamentally anti-democratic beliefs about most people not being smart enough to understand politics, labeling the masses as a bewildered herd, which is true, but I'm not too keen on Lippmann's solution of getting blind and crippled water buffaloes, i.e. journalists, to lead this bewildered herd. Lippmann was the man who coined the phrase the manufacture of consent, but unlike Chomsky, he wasn't using it derisively. He believed it's what was needed in a democratic society to align the actions of the elites and mass public opinion with what he believed was the public interest as dictated by specialised experts. Christopher Lasch distills Lippmann's views in the book Revolt of Elites. Again, if you can't tell, this is my subtle art of not giving a fuck. It changed my life. A complex industrial society required a government carried on by officials who would necessarily be guided. Since any form of direct democracy was now impossible, either by public opinion or expert knowledge, public opinion was unreliable because it could be united only by an appeal to slogans and symbolic pictures. So Lippmann's solution: control public opinion better. Align it with the experts. One way of working towards this goal was making journalism boring. As I pointed out earlier, Lippmann was the pioneer of journalistic objectivity, rejecting the exciting sensationalism of yellow journalism and popularising what we have to deal with today, which is fake, boring objectivity. The implications for controlling the public with this change should be obvious. Using the spectre of objectivity is far more effective in achieving popular support for something that usually may be unpalatable. It's also how the ABC are able to get away with making nothing good ever. Oh, it's super boring with no style. Must be accurate. And Chomsky's criticism of how this obviously ends up favouring big, powerful institutions who have a monopoly on information are pretty self-apparent.
There's a very high ideal that's celebrated by especially the elite media, and that's to maintain objectivity. Objectivity has a very definite meaning in media culture. It means repeating accurately anything that's said within the beltway. If you do that, it's objective. If you go beyond that, it's biased, subjective, emotional, and so on and so forth. Now, there's another concept: reality.
So Lippmann's model of public control via the media was largely adopted in the West, yet the experts that the media defers to aren't necessarily experts. They're just elites. And ready for me to reinforce a book I haven't yet stolen enough from. Say the line, Jordies! In Revolt of the Elite. Christopher Lasch was also very critical about how this new style coincided with the professionalisation of politics and how it discouraged mass public participation in democracy by treating public debate as a nuisance, a hindrance to getting to the truth, not an essential part of democracy. According to Lasch, to Lippmann, the scope of public debate accordingly has to be severely restricted. At best, public debate was a disagreeable necessity, not the very essence of democracy, but its primary defect, which arose only because exact knowledge, unfortunately, was in limited supply. And you can still see these tendencies amongst the established media and political class today. I mean, even a lot of opposition to Trump wasn't rooted in substance and policy differences, rather the displeasure of the political class being forced to hear unsavory ideas from the Trump brigade. It's where this whole fact-checking and content moderation trend got its start. I mean, Twitch debate lords might all be pedos, but at least they're increasing participation in democracy. However, with the fact that they exist, requires another filter to Chomsky's model, a filter which is particularly applicable to the new media landscape, and that filter is audience capture. And that's the kind of memification of ideas to the extent that you are financially disincentivized from offering views that counter the online meme, i.e. people that are very happy to perpetuate lies and myths as long as it fits in with the lies and myths that make their audience feel correct. Like for instance, I make videos that I know will be unpopular with my audience before I publish them. And I frequently get proven right. I do this knowing that there are easy positions that you can take and things that you can say that really boost your presence in the algorithm, but all that ever does is reward groupthink. You offer a nice feeling when all you ever say is all politicians are corrupt, but you, watching my content, you're seeing through the matrix. People never have to deal with cognitive dissonance, their own position, and perhaps moral failings in the world if you make them feel simultaneously like they're a victim and a hero by watching your media, laying the blame of all the bad in the world to an omnipotent and unitary political class. But you know why that is? Because that frame was fed to you by the unitary media class. This fuck the government frame. That is the essence of the Western propaganda model. Yes, to use an Australian example, even if the Liberals are in and your nan is watching Sky News, they're getting Liberals on to talk about. We've had a laser focus on getting rid of all this red tape that is holding back Australian businesses, Andrew. Yes, see, this is what's so refreshing, to have a government in power that's there just to kill itself off to the point before descending into Mad Max Thunderdome. In the West, government tyranny is framed eternally as the biggest enemy because government regulates corporations and corporations run the press. If you were in China, corporate tyranny would eternally be the enemy because the government runs the press. And the new media class seems to be completely oblivious to the fact that they have adopted that framing without even knowing that they have, because they grew up in that toilet water and have never questioned what that water is once. Roger Ailes, the inaugural CEO of Fox News, the man who probably first best exploited this phenomenon, once stated, "People don't want to be informed, they want to feel informed." And ironically, that is the exact service Ground News offers. They don't inform you at all about real bias. They provide you with the illusion, the warm feeling that you're media literate. The Ground News founder even says as much.
We wanted to create a product that even if you spend a few minutes a day, that you can wrap your head around complex news stories and leave feeling more informed.
Feeling more informed, founder's words. All the hallmarks of a scam product. Just like the shake weight, you only need to use it for a few minutes a day to feel the difference. Insane. I'm sorry, it takes more than a few minutes a day to decipher even one current event. I'd say it takes exactly whatever the number here is to get a decent enough rundown on the topic. But if this hasn't convinced you Ground News is a scam, legit com man Patrick Bet David offers an identical product. Same little bars and everything. Actually, I take it all back. If there's one person to provide the only clear escape from the Matrix, it's Patrick Bet David. Check this out.
You got this painting that I worked on and commissioned Brent Hill. You see me in here in the blue. Then we have Senna, Ayrton Senna. Then there's Tupac, the Shah of Iran, Lincoln, Kennedy, Einstein. Bunch of different hidden messages in there.
Let me see if I could decipher some of these hidden messages. Is one of them perhaps that Patrick Bet David thinks Shah Reza Pahlavi and Tupac are up there in intellectual weight with Einstein? Who the fuck thinks that?
MLK, empty chair, and they're debating two books, Atlas Shrugged and Communist Manifesto. This is my thinking room. If I want to think, I come here, I close up and I start thinking.
Thinking room. I'd say it's off the charts narcissistic to paint yourself with the world's greatest thinkers, but a Formula One racer, a dead rapper, a fairly inconsequential monarch debating the great intellectual books of all time, which apparently is a fantasy book. Literally, it's literally a work of fiction. And not even Karl Marx's most detailed work, basically a pamphlet he printed. It's all a bit cryptic. But I think I figured out another hidden message. One of the books is right-wing, and the other book is left-wing. The Ground News of paintings, especially because Karl Marx isn't present to discuss Karl Marx, but Milton Friedman is. Fuck. Even Chomsky's infographic. Nothing on that. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Patrick Bet David's tribute to his own genius really is exactly how the propaganda model works. My only issues are, where is Annoying Orange? And why isn't Rich Dad Poor Dad in there to represent centrism in the books they're debating? Lesson of the video? Unless you're as much of a thinker as Patrick Bet David, the complexity of ground users analysis will go over your head and will be of no use to you.
I think I'm well read. I think I'm well spoken. I think I'm well above average. It is important to me to carry myself in a manner where people are going to say, you know what, he knows what he's doing.
Best to stick on the safe side. Don't give your money to ground use. Store that money safely away in my super chats. Comment below with a super chat saying my money is safe. Biggest donation wins. Seriously, I prefer if you put it in my Patreon.
I'm Mr. Krabs, and I like money.